185 nations, numbering in the tens of thousands, have received my teachings and are working day and night in response to a special decree from God. Hence, today I would like to convey to you heaven's message, which is entitled, A Providential View of the Pacific Rim Era in Light of God's Will, the United States and the Future Direction of the United Nations and the World. It is a declaration of God's plan for his dispensation and the direction humankind should take. Ladies and gentlemen, if you carefully examine the progress of history, you will undoubtedly discover God's plan and sense his presence as he tirelessly works behind the scenes. Consider the history of civilization, which began centering on 4 of the world's great rivers. We are familiar with the Egyptian civilization that flourished along the Nile River, the Mesopotamian civilization between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Harappan civilization on the Indus River, and the early Chinese civilization around the Yellow River. The center of civilizations shifted over time to the shores of the Mediterranean Sea, where the Mediterranean peninsular civilizations flourished in Greece and Rome. History continued to progress, and the European continental civilization emerged. This continental civilization in turn gave birth to an island civilization, Great Britain, which flourished in the Atlantic sphere. The British Empire, which dominated the 7 seas and wielded its might as the empire on which the sun never sets, passed its splendid culture onto North America. We know these facts from history. Civilization on the North American continent raised the banner of democracy, which was rooted in Christianity. It bequeathed to the world the principles of freedom of religion and respect for equal human rights as it led the struggle against fascism and communism, which had established atheistic evil sovereignties. Through the victories of the First and Second World Wars, and the Third, the Cold War, it won victory over totalitarianism and communism. However, that victory does not simply mean that America is great. The development of human civilization did not stop there. Victory came because God had chosen and raised the United States of America as the second Israel, in accordance with his providential plan, and had raised and trained the American people through Christianity. God worked through America to bring his providence to its present stage of fruition. Ladies and gentlemen, the present time marks an important milestone in the development of civilization. Civilization has completed a circuit of the entire globe and has now arrived on the shores of the Pacific Ocean. History's course has come to the point under God's providence where it must be completed and concluded in the Pacific Rim region. No force can stop God's providence now. Though there were both victories and defeats during the course of indemnity under the evil sovereignty in the era before heaven, now nothing can prevent the rise of the Pacific Rim era. Herein lies the special reason that heaven declared 2007 to be the beginning of the Jubilee period. Ladies and gentlemen, the arrival of the Pacific Rim era signifies many things. What do you think the world would have been like if Jesus had fulfilled the complete messianic mission during his lifetime on earth? Jesus came as the Savior and Messiah to save all humankind. He did not come just to save the people of Israel, a small nation located on the corner of the Mediterranean Sea. At that time, Rome, based at the center of the Mediterranean, was the center of human civilization. Rome was ready to rule the seas. Heaven earnestly wished for Jesus to first teach and transform Rome, and then rule over her empire. Heaven was eager for a civilization that could bring salvation to all humanity by employing Rome's strength. Yet Jesus was cruelly put to death on the cross, as we know all too well through the biblical record. After thousands of years of preparation, God finally was able to send Jesus to earth as his only son. There is no way to fathom God's heart as he anxiously watched Jesus' each and every action. Jesus' death was a tragedy that broke God's heart. It brought him anguish even more extreme than the time when Adam and Eve, whom he created as the first ancestors of humankind, were lost from the Garden of Eden due to the fall. During the 2,000 years since the crucifixion, God, in the background of history, has walked a suffering path that is beyond human imagination. Through this course, he prepared the United States of America to serve as the nation of the second Israel. As a Christian nation that includes Catholicism and Protestantism, as well as the Orthodox world, the United States mission is to bring harmony and unity to Christianity as soon as possible. And moreover, in the 21st century, to fulfill the responsibility that had been the Roman Empire's, but which was not realized in Jesus' time. On America's shoulders rests the responsibility, within God's providence, to bring harmony and oneness among the world's 7 billion people and to expedite the creation of a peaceful, ideal world. These are not simply the words of Reverend Moon. This is heaven's decree to America. Then how can we unify Christianity? God has already revealed the solution through me, Reverend Moon, the true parent of humankind. Through me, God has given Christians the supreme command to practice lives of true love, to understand completely the reality of the spirit world to which we go after we die, and to establish model, ideal families, true families. What kind of love is true love, and what kind of a family is a true family? The essence of God's absolute true love is not to have others serve you. Rather, it is to be the first to give, to serve, and to care for others, and to seek the greater good. True love gives, forgets that it is given, and continues to give without ceasing. True love gives joyfully. We find it in the joyful and loving heart of a mother who cradles her child in her arms and nurses her child at her breast. True love is sacrificial love, such as that of a devoted son who finds his greatest satisfaction through dedicating himself with all of his body and soul to helping his parents. When we are bound together in true love, we will only ever be happy to be in each other's company. The attraction of true love brings not only the universe, but even God himself to follow us when we call on them. The value of true love is that it has the power to permanently dissolve the barriers that people, descended from the fall, have created, including national, racial, and even religious barriers. The main attributes of God's true love are that it is absolute, unique, unchanging, and eternal. Therefore, whoever practices true love will share God's pleasures and pains, enjoy the right to participate as an equal in his work, and enjoy the same right of inheritance. Therefore, a life of service, in other words, a life of true love, is an absolute requirement for entering the kingdom of heaven. A life of true love is the way to create all things. It is the mode of life of new families that live peacefully, centering on God, and form peaceful, ideal, model families. The path is now wide open for anyone to establish a true family. The family is the model by which people are to live in service to one another. The warm environment of oneness based on love and respect between parents and children, mutual fidelity and love between husband and wife, and trust and mutual reliance among siblings is the manifestation of the model ideal family. This means that you need to establish a true family wherein the stem of true love emerges from the root of true love and bears the fruit of true love. The responsibility of tribal messiahs, the mission of ambassadors for peace, and God's desire is to seek and set up families of Kook, comprised of 3 generations, grandparents, parents, and children, that serve together the ever-present God as a united family. You should form families that God will miss and yearn to return to after he has been away. You should raise families to which he can come freely as a parent visiting his children. This is what it means to live in service to God. In such a family, God is the vertical subject partner of everyone's conscience. Following God as its vertical subject partner, the mind of each family member stands in the position of that person's very own vertical subject partner. Each person must bring the mind and body into unity by following the mind. It is in such a family that the 4 major types of love, parental love, conjugal love, children's love, and siblings love, which also form the 4 great realms of heart, are perfected. It is only in such a family that the relationships based on upper and lower, right and left, and front and rear can be linked together and the resultant spherical motion continue. This is how God's everlasting model ideal families, ideal nations, and peaceful ideal kingdom can be formed. If the entire world were filled only with such families of true character, it would be a world of natural order in which the heavenly way and heavenly law would reign supreme. There would be no need for lawyers, prosecutors, or judges. Among the 7 billion people on the earth today, almost 5 billion are our neighbors and relatives. They are our brothers and sisters of the Pacific Rim region. In other words, they are our relatives within the heritage of the Mongolian birthmark. Is there anything we cannot accomplish if we join together as one blood through receiving the blessing of marriage, centering on God's peace ideal? The future of humanity is now in the hands of the nations of the Pacific Rim. Ladies and gentlemen, God's providence has now spread from the North American continent and blossomed in the island civilization of Japan, which is in the same position that Britain once held. It is now about to fulfill its destiny by reaching fruition on the Korean peninsula, the homeland of the true parents who have appeared as the savior of humanity and the returning Messiah. The Korean peninsula stands in the same position as Rome did in Jesus' time, in that it is considered a conflict zone transcending the spheres of religion and politics that must resolve all the world's problems. From a geopolitical point of view, the Korean peninsula persists as an arena of the most intense confrontation, despite the ongoing efforts on the part of all to secure peace. The principles of restoration through indemnity make it inevitable that civilization will bear fruit in the Pacific Rim region, centered on the Korean peninsula. Fortunately, during the Korean War, the UN forces led by the United States were thankfully mobilized to the peninsula. Yet they did not recover the homeland and hometown of God's desire as they should have, according to God's will, and they left the job half done. As a result, global conflict and strife emerged, soon to be called the Cold War. As a result of this, the Korean people lost their property and were displaced, leading them to search for God. In order to restore this through indemnity, I established the Universal Peace Federation 7 years ago. I then organized the Peace Kingdom Corps and Peace Kingdom Police Force, comprising heavenly women who have received the marriage blessing, who love peace, and who are willing to serve and sacrifice for the work of the Universal Peace Federation. I have taken the lead in educating those involved with these organizations. These peace organizations stand in the forefront for actualizing a world of peace centering on God. They will create the peaceful, ideal world that God desires. You may not be aware of this, but I have been assisting behind the scenes of the six-party talks that were being held for the sake of resolving the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula and working to reconcile democratic nations with communist nations. I am presenting a solution based on the principles of peace and harmony rooted in the new ideology of the Heavenly Father. At such pressing times, what exactly should the role of America and the United Nations be? Hawaii in the Pacific, located at the center of the Pacific Rim, bridges east and west and links north and south. With the support and protection of the American continent, the Korean Peninsula should become the homeland that protects and defends the Pacific Rim region by bringing together all the island nations of the Pacific. I say this because the future of humankind lies in the preservation of the Pacific Rim region, centering on Korea, Japan, and the United States. As I was well aware of Heaven's plans for this region, I invested 33 of the prime years of my life in the United States, beginning in the early 1970s for the sake of world peace. On that victorious foundation, I returned to Korea, where I am working to complete the providence of establishing God's homeland and hometown. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask that you analyze the current state of affairs in the world closely. Although the days of communism are gone, even now powerful nations are constantly on the lookout for opportunities to pursue their own interests aggressively at the expense of the powerless and small island nations. No small island nation by itself can deal with these powerful nations and their economic, political, or even military ambitions. They are so powerful that if they wanted to, they could dominate any smaller nation in a single day without shedding blood. Only when peace and security are settled in the Pacific Rim can peace for all humankind be guaranteed. As I have mentioned, the small island nations by themselves cannot contend with the great tsunami of powerful nations moving into the region. The time has come, therefore, for all these small island nations in the Pacific Rim sphere to unite and build the homeland of the new godly civilization. The small island nations dispersed in both the northern and southern regions of the Pacific, on either side of the equator, as well as Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, Indonesia, the Solomon Islands, Australia, New Zealand, and other countries, should become like one country, forming a union to sustain peace to the Pacific Rim civilization. This will secure peace and stability for all people. What I am saying to you is that you have the responsibility to protect and save the oceanic realm, which is a lifeline upon which humanity depends, from the environmental destruction and conflicts that are worsening by the day, and to shield its natural resources for the sake of peace in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, for the purpose of resolving these problems afflicting humankind, on September 12, 2005, I proclaimed throughout all of heaven and earth the establishment of the Universal Peace Federation, which will enable God's providence to flourish. Now it is possible for UPF to serve as an able-type counterpart to the UN in the era after the coming of heaven. It will renew the Cain-type United Nations and lead the way for millions of ambassadors for peace throughout the world who have taken up the ideology of Heavenly Father, that is, my teachings, which consist of the principles of true love and the ideal of a true family, to, without fail, fulfill the heavenly will of creating one family under God. Ladies and gentlemen, through the cross-cultural marriage blessings that transcend religious denomination and nationality, the Universal Peace Federation will be the vanguard that carries out the great revolution of restoring the original lineage of humanity, hearkening back to Adam before the fall. Some may laugh and say that this is impossible. Yet, where there is a will, there is a way, especially if it is God's will. The international and cross-cultural marriage blessings are conducted according to the teachings of Reverend Moon, who does God's work on his behalf. Please think about this. What do you think will happen if people from the United States and countries such as Russia marry across the boundaries of their nationalities through these marriage blessing ceremonies? The two nations will belong to one family under God, the eternal absolute Lord of all creation. How could anyone aim weapons at, much less launch nuclear weapons at, a nation that many millions of grandchildren from their own lineage make their home? The holy task of building the ideal kingdom of heaven, the sacred reign of peace on earth, by recovering our ideal homeland and hometown, is being carried out enthusiastically in all corners of the world. This is God's hope for engrafting the 7 billion people of the world to the lineage of the true tribe. Beloved leaders, ladies and gentlemen, please do not miss your chance to ride on the surging currents of heavenly fortune during this important and sacred jubilee. Take the lead in protecting and developing the realm of the oceans, which covers 75% of the earth. Where else will you find undiscovered treasure stores of natural resources that hold the promise of reviving the earth, which is endangered by all kinds of pollution and resource depletion? You have truly come to a significant event today. You should now join together under the Strong Korea banner. The scope of this campaign shall soon go beyond the Republic of Korea to the rest of Asia and become the beacon that shines beyond Asia to the world. The Universal Peace Federation's ideology shall be a cry for a strong Korea, because at the root of strong Korea is God's philosophy of peace based on true love. Is there an ideology or philosophy that can surpass this philosophy of peace and the ideal of God's true love? Heaven shall surely be triumphant. On this meaningful occasion, please engrave this message on your hearts. The families of your good ancestors in heaven are already blessed. Numbering in the billions, they have come to earth today, and they are listening to this message with you. This is because it is only through you, their descendants, that they can perfect themselves and advance to the positions of the true parents, true teachers, and true lords and owners. You should not forget the fact that the spiritual and physical worlds live and breathe together in this way and walk hand in hand. Your families should now find their place in history by fulfilling their missions as members of the Peace Kingdom Corps and Peace Kingdom Police Force of the able UN, which is advancing God's providence in the revolutionary era after the coming of heaven. History will forever remember you for leading a noble life of devotion for the well-being of humanity and world peace. I am now developing globally the Peace Kingdom Corps and the Peace Kingdom Police Force, which I founded. I hope to see the heroic sight of you holding the UPF flag, standing in the vanguard of the Peace Kingdom Corps and Peace Kingdom Police Force, and shouting for a strong Korea. I pray that you will engrave today's message in your heart and use this message as material for educating your children, the youth in your country, and the people of your nation. May God's blessings and grace be upon you, your families, the Pacific Rim, and the Peace UN, and upon the launch of a strong Korea. Thank you.
Thank you. That's truly a call, a strong call from our true parents to mobilize ourselves throughout the world. Now I'm very happy to invite interpreter and special assistant to our chairman, Kook, to share a report with us. Let's welcome Mr. Timothy Elder.
Good morning, brothers and sisters. This is, I think, my second time in Lancaster Gate. First time in perhaps almost 30 years. I was here once in the 1980s. And so wonderful to see this great church being maintained. Shall I raise this a little bit? How's that? How's that? Is that better? Okay. It's so wonderful for me as I go to various places around the world and find that I can go to any major city in the world and find that there's a group of people there who will welcome me as their brother. And I realize that this is really the work of our true parents who have dedicated their lives to create a foundation around the world. And in fact, they have created the first, probably the founder of any religion or religious group that has created such a foundation that is truly worldwide. And we're all here because of the work of our true parents, and we're able to meet today as brothers and sisters because of the lifelong work of our true parents. So I'd like to begin by giving another round of applause to our true parents. We're grateful. I believe Kook will address us in a moment, but before he does, he's asked me to give you some basic briefing on the situation in Japan and Korea. Now I'll be focusing on more recent events, but as a kind of background, I'll be going back a few years, so please bear with me. Kook Jinim was assigned to come to start working in Korea in 2005, in January 2005. At that time he came as the chairman of the Tongye group, and immediately he started working to improve the companies that the church had, which were in most of which were deep financial trouble. The first thing he did, and which is continuing today, was to start changing the culture. He immediately set out 5 management principles by which formed the basis for that change in the culture. And these were that results over status. In other words, that no one was entitled to a position. You had to have results that justified your having a certain position. That accountability over popularity. Some leaders are popular with their subordinates. Or they are liked by their superiors, but they're not very accountable to the goals that they are given. Well, that's not going to work. Accountability over popularity. And clarity over certainty. This involves transparency, to how clarity over how the decisions are made. And sometimes we have to make decisions without 100% full information, but we make a decision based on what the information we have, and we make sure that people in our organization know why we're making that decision. And later on, if there's more information that becomes available, we have to change that decision. Then also, again, people understand why that change is being made. Transparency. I understand Simon has been doing a lot in terms of transparency here. I think that's very wonderful. And productive conflict over harmony. Many times, if there's a difference of opinion, we want to paper that over. But no, we hash it out. We don't just pretend that we're all agreeing on something, because it's possible for people to sincerely disagree over something. And so there's a lot of productive conflict that goes on in our organizations these days, and it produces a greater growth for the organization as a whole. Whereas just harmony that is just not genuine makes the organization stand still, or perhaps we lose the opportunity for new ideas to come forth. And then trust over invulnerability. No one is perfect. Some leaders like to pretend that they're invulnerable or perfect, but no, that they trust the subordinates and each other, so that we can move forward. So that change in culture, these are principles that are not new to Kook Jinim. He didn't invent them. If you go on the internet, you can find many people talking about them. But for Korea, they were revolutionary, and for our organizations, they were particularly revolutionary. But we've been pushing these all for the past 7.5 years, and they have really changed the culture to a great deal. The first thing he started was to improve the companies. That was his specific assignment in the beginning. Now, in the beginning, there were about 30-some companies, and most of them were losing money, and some of them were losing a lot of money. And so Kook Jinim went through the 30-some companies and decided which would be kept, which would be either sold or closed, and which could be improved. And so then he started working in the beginning. I guess this is going to be the yes. In the beginning, this is the trend in terms of the sales and in the operating income. And we focus on operating income rather than net income, because it gives us the good idea of the underlying health of the business itself. Where in the beginning, at 41 billion won a year was being lost. I went on to Google last night and used their foreign exchange calculators. Apparently, that's about 23 million pounds. But in actuality, there was a lot of situations that appeared to be fraudulent accounting, and our CPAs that were hired by Kook Jinim estimated that probably if you took those into account, the loss was not actually was actually probably well over twice that much. So the companies were drowning in red ink, and as you can see, the underlying operations of the company has been improving. The blue here includes the sale of real estate assets that we have that are developed, for example, condominiums and others. So those are good for bringing in cash on the short term. But once you sell something, once you sell a piece of land or condominium, you can't sell it twice. So it's really it's the improvement in the underlying business operations that have really encouraged us a great deal. So although economic times are difficult, our companies are continuing to improve. And then after the Korean companies were improved and reduced from 32 to about 13 that were making money, and recently even the Sega Times, the newspaper, is even making money now. Turned a operating profit last year, and just a couple of days ago it gave its first half-year report, and again it's still profitable during the first half year of this year. Then turned his attention to the Korean church, because as Father appointed Hyungjin-nim, the international president and also head of the Korean church, Father also asked Kook-jin-nim to help out in the organizational matters, because the Korean church needed a lot of improvement in terms of its organization. So Kook-jin-nim went around to 120 churches in Korea. At that time there were more than 400 churches, and checked the situation of the churches specific on the ground, on the site. He went to 120 that were scheduled visits, another 40 that were unscheduled visits, that he would just show up one day without notifying anyone. And he saw that well, there was a lot of work that needed to be done. And the members were also aware of this. The members asked for two things in particular. One was to improve the quality of their ministers, and the second was to please improve the quality of our facilities, improve the environment. And so that is what he set out doing. And during the next few years, the number of churches were reduced by half, and the number of ministers was reduced by a third. But then let's see whether that resulted in a reduction of membership or donations. Here, as you see, the membership has been growing. This is 16,000 at this time, and this actually the number of members on roll had been going down for the previous 20 years. But then, after the restructuring was done and a lot of churches closed and a lot of ministers were let go, yes, there was a reduction a temporary reduction in the membership. But then, since then, it has been growing steadily. And right now, there are 30,000 people who are coming to church on a regular basis, and actually there are 42,000 members who are on roll and who are coming to church on at least an occasional basis. And then the donations situation is even more dramatic. In 2007, there was a 760 million Korean won. I did this on Google as well. And now that was a 760 million Korean won was on a monthly. That was the monthly total of all donations throughout the country. I guess we don't have to worry about this, right? Okay, nothing's gonna collapse on us. And then by 2011, we had 2.06 billion won, and that's an equivalent of about 1,155,000 pounds of donations coming into the church each month, for a total of 24.8 billion, or close to 14 million pounds during the year of 2011. That's up that's a growth of 272%. These donations do not include special donations. In other words, the Korean members are donating for to build the completion level Cheonbokgung Temple, for example, and that's not included here. Holy Day offerings are not included here. This includes tithes and gratitude offerings and such, and Sunday offerings and such, regular offerings. Someone might say, well, isn't it possible that these figures are inflated? But again, for the sake of transparency, a lot of effort has been put into making sure that they're not inflated. The statistics are inputted by the churches themselves, not by the headquarters. We have a link to all the churches around the country by computer software, and the churches put in how much they collect each week, into that computer software online, and then all the headquarters can do is compile those results and output the results. And well, maybe the churches are inflating their results when they put it in. Well, there's actually a disincentive to doing that, because whatever they record, they have to send 10% to the headquarters as their tithe to the headquarters. So there is a strong disincentive for churches to be inflating their results. And I attend a church in northeastern Seoul, and today is the first Sunday of July, so I'm sure if I were there, I would receive an income and expenditure report for June. Every first Sunday of every month, all members in that church receive 2 sheets of paper, actually. One is the expenditure and revenue report for the previous month, plus a list of who donated how much by name. And so, and sometimes there is a discussion. We paid headquarters too much. So if there were an inflation of results, if there were for some reason the pastor trying to pad his results by sending in more to headquarters than he needed to, believe me, he would be hearing very quickly from the members. So there is this. So I would say that we can be pretty sure that these numbers are accurate, and that this is an amazing growth that is taking place, and the growth is real. And people are, you can see, this is a sign that people are voting with their money. And people are not going to donate to an organization where it's not clear how the money is being used, whether it's going into someone's personal pocket or something like that. But because they can see it's being used for God's will and God's purpose, that's why they are donating. And also, Kook has been working to change the culture of the Korean church, working together with Hyungjinim, have been working to change the culture of the Korean church from a culture of receiving to a culture of giving. In the past, unfortunately, the attitude was, well, donating, that's something the Japanese do. Please don't talk to us about donations, we're Korean. And there was a culture of receiving. That was a culture of dependency. But that's not a good thing. Kook will talk later today about the Freedom Society, and he'll talk about, I think, dependency and not taking responsibility. But now Korean church is now responsible for itself. In the past, a Korean church was being subsidized to the tone of maybe about $20 million a year, and that was coming to them from 2 parents. But more than that, but fundamentally, those are funds that were being raised by the Japanese members. But in autumn of 2009, the Korean church sent an official memo to the Tongil Foundation, which was directly handling those funds, and saying, thank you very much for all the support that you've given us, but we're now able to support ourselves. We don't need outside support anymore. That we're able to support ourselves with the donations that we receive from members. So at this level, the Korean church could not support itself. The headquarters could not operate on this amount. But now at this level, that is comfortably enough for headquarters to operate. So it does not need any more outside help. And whenever there's an event such as the True Parents' birthday events or the blessing events, these are paid for not by going to True Parents and asking for money for those events, but those are paid for by the Korean members and by the people who participate in those events. So there's been a huge change in culture in the church in Korea, and we hope that now Korea is the providential father country, and we hope that from now on it will more and more start to really fulfill the position of the father as the provider of the family. Not just leaving it up to the mother country. Now, so once the Korean church was in order, in 2009, Father instructed Kook to go to Japan and start working there to help the church in Japan. The church in Japan was in a serious crisis at that time. Beginning around 2007, 2008, the Japanese government began changing the law. And the effect of those changes was to make it impossible for our church to conduct the kind of fundraising that we have been doing previously. Japan, over the years, the Japanese church has provided human resources and financial resources for the growth of our movement worldwide. And the people who opposed our church thought that maybe by cutting off those resources in Japan, that they could cause our entire movement to collapse. Particularly after the end of the Cold War, some people felt, okay, now we don't need the Unification Church anymore. And after all, this is a foreign church from Korea. Maybe we can, now it's served its purpose, maybe we can get rid of it. So what we had in Japan was police coming into many of our churches, to our members' homes and into their businesses. They arrested 43 of our members, holding them, not just arresting them and then immediately releasing them on bail. No, holding them for up to 2, sometimes 3 weeks, questioning them while they were being held. And so they were pulled away from their families for that time, and their faces were broadcast on television. But then at the end of those questionings, most of them were released just by paying a nominal fine. So it was clear that the Japanese government had made a policy decision to close down our church. And the members in Japan were losing hope. And some people some people in Japan look back at those days, and they were saying, maybe they were thinking of having to go underground. They were thinking of having to maybe start a new religious corporation. Because the Japanese government clearly had decided to deregister our church, and so that we would no longer be a legal entity. So Father sent Kook into that situation. And I understand, I was not with him at the time, but I understand he said that it was like doing a bungee jump without really being sure whether that cord was attached to your ankle. You weren't really sure how far you were going to fall, and it was very difficult to find any hope. But he went there, and in the very dark situation, God showed him the way for the church to move forward and to overcome that kind of persecution. These arrows show the places where the police entered our churches around the country in Japan. And one thing he found when he went to Japan was that a very serious situation had been unattended for a very long time, where for some 40 years, some 4,300 of our members had been abducted, confined, and put through a process of forced deconversion. In other words, of deprogramming. And the church, because it was so busy fulfilling the requirements of God's providence, either did not or could not deal with that situation. And in the midst of that very difficult situation, Kook made a strong decision that the church had to deal with this. And this was really a situation that even many Japanese church leaders opposed, and advised him strongly not to pursue this campaign to liberate the Japanese members from abduction and confinement. He said this will only bring more opposition and will only make the situation more difficult. But he has mobilized resources from around the world and working together with other True Family members to bring victory in this situation. This is not a situation that has been solved. We still have people being abducted from time to time, but what has changed is that, for one thing, the members are now more confident. Members have now been, especially the Japanese church has given education focusing primarily on those of high risk, but everyone, on what the deprogrammers say and how to and what the church's response is to what they say. For example, talking about Father's course and about his relationship with various women. The church's response is given to those. And I think that lecture was given here not too long ago by Dr. Jin-Hun Young. He came here not long ago, yes, and talking about Father's course. There's nothing about Father's course that we need to be ashamed of. Everything that he has done has been done for a providential reason. And if members understand those reasons and understand the providence, then they can resist. And in many cases now we see members returning to the church after these attempted deconversions at a much higher rate than previously. Of course, you've heard, maybe I don't know if Mr. Goto has been to London or not. A member, he has, not yet, a member who was abducted and confined for 12 years and 5 months. And this sister, very unfortunate situation where she was put into a situation where she felt she could not continue, and she lost her life in that confinement situation. And Kook has not only led the Japanese effort on abduction confinement from behind, but also has been leading it at the forefront as well, responding to media interviews like this. This is an interview published in a Korean magazine, and the headline says that over 44 years, 4,300 Japanese members of the Unification Church have been abducted and confined. And this is a major monthly magazine in Korea where he has spoken about that. And human rights experts were invited to Japan from here in Europe, and from Malaysia. Members of the Malaysian Parliament went to Japan to inspect the situation themselves and also to meet the members of the Japanese Diet. A delegation from Korea went, including incumbent members of the Korean National Assembly. Also, again, speaking to members of the Japanese Parliament, saying how can an advanced country such as Japan allow this kind of thing to happen? In some cases, the police either refuse to investigate these situations, or in even extreme cases, even help the deprogrammers. When a member finally manages to escape, the police have sometimes returned that person to the deprogrammer. How can people are asking around the world, how can an advanced country such as Japan be allowing such a thing to occur? And Injinim in the United States has been working on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., bringing information about this situation to members of Congress. And last year, a member of Congress went to Japan, an incumbent member of the Democratic Party went to Japan, and again talked to the members of the Japanese Parliament about this, and again asked the same questions. And again, another delegation from the U.S. Congress is expected later this year. So now, there are a number of members of the Japanese Parliament that have received visits from Europe and from Malaysia. From Malaysia, imagine yourself in a position as the Japanese being lectured to by Malaysia on human rights. That then from Korea and from the United States. And so they have actually formed a group of their own, saying, okay, we need to do something about this. And there's a group of members of the Japanese Parliament that may be about to move on this. This is in February 2010, due to some efforts, I think, by Mark Braun, perhaps, and Peter, and others here in Europe. This situation was presented at the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. And again, the Japanese were very shocked and surprised to find themselves being accused of human rights violations at this kind of international venue. And this was very effective as well. Now, the Japanese members in this difficult situation have, under Kook leadership, have switched to direct witnessing. And we're going to face this thing head on. And so they have taken the Japanese edition of Father's autobiography, and so far they have distributed over 4 million copies around Japan. At the end of the Second World War, the U.S. felt that it could convert Japan to Christianity, and so they decided to distribute 10 million copies of the Bible. And the Japanese church says that they've set that as their goal as well. So far, they have completed 4 million copies of the distribution of Father's autobiography. And also, there's emphasizing strict compliance to the law by all members, even if we feel that it's unconstitutional. The Japanese church has done nothing wrong. Japanese church has done nothing wrong. A lot has been said on the internet about the business activities and sales activities by Japanese members during the later 80s and 90s and so forth. But all religious groups around the world collect donations and sometimes sell items in exchange for donations. And this is what they've been doing is protected by the freedom of religion clause in the Japanese Constitution. But we believe that although we believe that it is nothing that they've done, nothing wrong, still we are complying with the law, even though we believe that law is unconstitutional. And there's now a stricter separation between churches and businesses, meaning that the church does not, that the churches make sure that there's a very strong firewall, that the pastors do not give instructions to businesses, for example, and so that that is more transparency for the Japanese church in Japan. Now we get to more recent events. Where now, after Kook started with the companies, and then he went to the Korean church by Father's instruction, and then once the Korean church was more or less on course, then Father instructed him to go to Japan, and things there improved quite a bit. But then one day Kook was traveling with us, and he asked us, what will happen to God's providence if Korea loses its independence? And right about that time, there were a couple of attacks by North Korea on South Korea in 2010. In March 2010, a South Korean Navy frigate was sunk by North Korea just off the coast in the Yellow Sea. And then in November 2010, North Korea shore artillery bombed a South Korean island that was just across the border. And in the case of the sinking of the naval frigate, 46 sailors died. In the case of the bombing of the island, 2 Marines and 2 civilians died. So, given the power structure in Northeast Asia, you had to assume that North Korea had at least perhaps either tacit or perhaps active support from China before deciding to have these provocations. So South Korea's security was clearly at risk. And what to do about that? Because Father at that time was declaring South Korea to be God's fatherland, God's homeland. And perhaps because that declaration was made, Satan was attacking and trying to attack and trying to eliminate God's fatherland, or to bring that under his control. And so Kook decided to work up a PowerPoint lecture, and he gave me a call one night at 10:30 and said, "Okay, Tim, this is going to be the first slide, this is going to be the second slide," and it dictated to me what the slides would be. And that is what we see today as the Strong Korea lecture. And he, starting in early 2011, he started giving this first to a group of about 2,000 people that were brought together by the Seigeibo newspaper from around the country. These were people who agreed basically with the direction that the Father was going, and gave that lecture to them. But then he started touring the entire country, speaking to church members, but also to ambassadors for peace. And as you'll see, this movement has expanded quite a bit. What you see here is a rally that was held in March of this year at a convention hall in Seoul, where Father also spoke, and where the Father gave this speech that you just read for Hundoke. This is Dr. Min-ha Kim, a former president of one of Korea's most prominent universities, and also an advisor to the president on unification issues. He's the president of the Korea's National Council for Ambassadors for Peace, and he has agreed to work along with Kook as the joint chairman for the national campaign for a strong Korea. And these two gentlemen represented the government at this campaign, at this rally. This gentleman is the Honorable Park Sung-chun, who is the Minister for Patriots and Veterans Affairs. And this gentleman here is the Vice Minister of Defense. And he read the message from the Minister of Defense at this event prior to Father speaking. in the history of our church, I don't think we've ever had incumbent members of the government coming and officially representing the government in this way. We always have a former this or former that, and sometimes very wonderful and very good people, but it's been very hard for us to get the government to really take a stand and say, yes, we support you. But in this case, the South Korean government did. And Kook Jinim gave his strong Korea presentation to the group, and then Hyung Jinim introduced two parents, and yes, there you go. And then Father came and gave the address that you just read for Hundoke. And then at the end, it was very inspiring for us that Father called his two sons up onto the stage, and they led the entire congregation in a rousing singing of the Lord into His garden comes. Now the two gentlemen from the government were still there, and a lot of ambassadors for peace were there, and so not everyone in the audience knew the words, but there were enough members in the audience to make it very loud, and everyone followed along as best they could. It was very inspiring for everyone. And then Kook Jinim visited Washington, D.C., where he gave the Strong Korea lecture at the U.S. Capitol, at the Visitor Center in the U.S. Capitol. This lecture is not just about Korea. It's not all just about Korea. First of all, because Korea is God's fatherland, whether or not Korea is protected is a matter of concern for all of humanity. Because if Korea loses its sovereignty, loses its independence, then imagine what that will do to the province worldwide. It will lose its center. But in addition, this is about creating like you just read in the Father's address, this is about creating an able realm that is centered on Korea, about the island countries of Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, Indonesia, Solomon Islands, Australia, and New Zealand, and other countries, other able countries are coming together in order to protect God's providence and to form a force that is going to deter any kind of aggressive action or any kinds of sinful action by Cain's camp. These are some very prominent people here. Former commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet was there. Former commander of the Japanese naval fleet was there. Some very important people were there and listened to this lecture. And in Korea, a lot of groups now are asking Kook Jinim to come and give this lecture to them. In this case, this was the meeting of the Vietnam War veterans of Korea. Asked him to come and give this lecture. And this gentleman here is he's a retired 4-star general who was the commander of Korean forces in Vietnam during that war. And we're not paying for these events. Either, for example, this is a breakfast meeting, and we get other people to pay for this, because this is not something that the Unification Church should be paying for, right? We're not the only ones who should be paid for saving Korea. If we're going to do something like that, other people ought to help us. And so in this particular event, the vice chairman of one of the major accounting firms in Korea paid for the breakfast. These are the veterans. And he received an invitation from the Republic of Korea Army Cadet Military School. There are 3 institutions in Korea that commission officers. 90% of Korea's junior officers are commissioned at this particular school. This is Major General Kim Han-sun greeting Kook Jinim on his arrival at the school, and his staff. And Major General Kim introducing Kook Jinim to a class of cadets. About 1,600 cadets attended this meeting. Some people look at this and ask, is this North Korea or South Korea? But it's South Korea here. I'm pretty sure this is Dr. Pak. I think he's trying to find his seat. But you can see everybody is, all their eyes are focused on one point there, aren't they? So he gave, again, the Strong Korea lecture at this place. General Kim told us that although women are not required to serve in the military in Korea, more and more women are volunteering for service out of concern for their country. And probably more women should. It would probably be a good thing for Korean society if more women did serve in the military. I guess we'll put this way. Now, this is the minister that you saw at the March event, the Minister of Patriots and Veterans Affairs. He stayed at and when Father spoke, he stayed for Kook Jinim's presentation. He stayed for all of Father's speech, and he said, "Wow, this is really great. I need to have Kook Jinim come and give this lecture to the civil servants who work in my ministry." And so Kook Jinim was invited then to come and give this lecture to the employees of the Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs. And here they are posing for a photograph in the minister's official office. And then in the conference room is giving the Strong Korea lecture to the civil servants there. And the media covered this. This is one of the media stories on the event in March where Father spoke. And really the transformation of the media since Kook Jinim and Hyung Jinim's arrival has been dramatic, 180 degrees, I would say. In the past, we considered the media to be our enemy, and we would always sort of circle the wagons when the media came around. We didn't want reporters looking in our direction at all. But transparency. This is about transparency, and transparency means that sometimes you show people things that you're not quite so proud of. You know, we're still working on some problems. Not everything has been fixed. We're not perfect, but we don't pretend to be perfect. Yeah, we know we have problems, but we're working on it. We're working on it, and when we are transparent, then that builds trust, doesn't it? When we're transparent, that builds trust, and when we build trust, then we start getting better coverage. Because the media are not just trying to they say they're perfect, but let's see if that's true. Let's start tearing it down. Let's start to tear down their myth of perfection. But we come out and say we're not perfect. We're not perfect. So come in and with your cameras and ask us questions, and we'll show you as we are. And as a result, the media situation has turned dramatically. Kook Jinim, soon after his arrival, visited the presidents of all the major televisions in Korea, and sat down with him and says, "Yeah, my father is the Messiah, the Savior, and Lord of the Second Advent." And this is something that he says to all VIPs. And he says to them, "Aren't you glad that the Messiah has come to Korea? As a Korean, doesn't that make you proud?" So what is a Korean going to say? Yeah? No, I don't want him to come to Korea. Is that what he's going to say? No. But it's for one thing, in the Korean culture context, it's very beautiful to see a son testifying to his father like that. And not just to his father, but what really inspires them even more is that he testifies to his younger brother. They've seen people testify to their father maybe once in a while, but not to a younger brother. But he says, "Oh, my younger brother is even greater than I am. You should meet him." And so sometimes they went together to meet these people. And some online coverage of Father's event. And also this is a magazine published by a group of people from India who live in Korea and published their magazine, and they were very excited. They were saying, "Well, India, we have some issues with China. We'd like to be a part of this Strong Korea movement as well." And so they interviewed Kook Jinim, came to the office and interviewed him, and published this very long article in their magazine. And this is the Tongyil Shinmun. This is a newspaper that specializes in unification affairs. They interviewed and published that article. And this is a monthly magazine, and again, this is the event when Father spoke, and this is the December of 2011. There was a event held sponsored together by Segeilbo and the Korea Institute for Defense Research, and many prominent security professionals attended this, and that this is about that event. And as this also with a one-on-one Q&A. And this magazine actually took Kook Jinim's slides and published the slides. These are some of the slides that you'll be that are used, and also just basically published the transcript of the entire lecture. So it's exciting quite a lot of people. And strong Korea sounds like a very common phrase, but Koreans are saying, you know what? We never used that phrase before. We never used that phrase before. Korea has been invaded close to 1,000 times during its 5,000-year history, an average of once every 5 years. And maybe kind of their survival instinct was to stay low, keep a low profile, never say we're strong. In fact, they were not strong, which is why they were invaded so many times, but they were always been a fear that if they became strong, they would provoke more invasion. But now this has really caught on, and there's a presidential campaign going on now. There's going to be a presidential election in December. The other morning I was watching the morning news, and I saw the opposition, the Democratic Party, the leftist party candidate, get up one morning and say, "Yeah, I'm in favor of strong Korea." So now everyone is talking about strong Korea. It's changing the culture of the entire country in that way. This is one of the major weekly magazines, and they covered the event in Washington. And this is also another weekly magazine also covering the event in Washington. Monthly magazine that interviewed Kook Jinim again and also covered the March event. And then he took this Strong Korea to the Philippines and to Mindanao. I think Reverend Yong gave you a detailed report on the blessing of 12,000 couples in Mindanao, didn't he? Did everyone attend that? Okay, so Reverend Song is saying very loudly, yes, he did, although I don't hear much reaction from over here. But if you didn't attend that lecture, please watch the video, because it's a very inspiring situation. I don't think we have time to go into it specifically this morning, but that was a situation that came out of the Hundokhae practice. But connected to that, Kook Jinim also attended an international leadership conference in Mindanao where he gave the Strong Korea lecture. And also one of the guests at the international leadership conference was a gentleman from China who got up and said, "Okay, I agree with some of the things you said, but China, we're not that kind of an aggressive country, and actually we've been fighting among ourselves inside China for a lot of times, but I don't think we ever invaded other countries." But you know, Koreans have a way of putting things very nicely, and they say that if you're in a subway and someone steps on another person's foot, you know, if it's a subway that's very crowded and someone steps on someone else's foot, the person who steps on the foot doesn't remember that incident, but the person who gets stepped on, he's going to remember that for a long time. I think maybe something like that is going on here. And so actually Kook Jinim answered that question very well. He went through the list of incidents of that. And he also met with the religious leaders. And I think if you attended Reverend Yong's lecture, you know Dr. Parks and his role and then bring that incredible miracle to Mindanao. Maybe before we go to the blessing, I wonder if I can diverse for just a minute to talk about the strong able, if that's okay. All right. Okay, I guess the answer is no. Okay, this is the. Okay, I will go on. Media coverage of the March blessing. The March blessing, we had coverage from KBS News Y, that's a 24-hour news station in Korea. Yonhap and Reuters was there. In previous blessings, we've given Associated Press exclusive coverage. This time we gave it to Reuters. And Chungang-ilbo and Segil-ilbo, Cheonji-ilbo, these are Korean papers. Channel 4 was represented by a firm that they contracted. And Al Jazeera was represented by a firm that they had contracted. How many people here have seen the Al Jazeera program? Almost, okay. Looks like about half or a little bit more than half. How did you like it? Was it very good? I liked it very much. And from Japan, we had the TBS channel. For the past 20 years in Japan, the coverage has been 100%, not 99.9, but 100% negative. And the media has created a lot of the background for the abduction and confinement, so that the media creates this highly toxic environment, not just negative, but toxic environment against our church. And this supports in the society really a bigotry against our church. And then leftist lawyers and Christian ministers, opposition Christian ministers, then go to parents and say, "This is what your child is doing. You need to give us money so that we will pull your child out of this situation." And one of the channels that have been doing that the most over the past 20 years was the channel TBS, which is located in Tokyo, but it has a network that extends throughout Japan. And so then this time they decided they contacted us and they wanted to come in and have access to our blessing. And this was the result of coaching the Japanese church on how to do media relations, again, talking to them about being transparent. And so our transparency was challenged, I guess you can say. They said in the past we've taken hidden cameras into events, but this time we want to go in through the front door and film you just as you are. And so it was a risk, but we did it, and that worked out also very well. It wasn't 100% what we would have liked. It wasn't as good as probably as Channel 4 or as good as Al Jazeera, but it was certainly a whole lot better than it was in the past. We evaluated it maybe about 80%, we think, but that's a whole lot better than 0%, isn't it? And then also a number of newspapers from Japan, and also the Christian television service. The Christian television service's report on this was very interesting. Their headline was Unification Church warning, like a typhoon warning or hurricane warning. They're saying the Unification Church has changed and we need to watch out. And their message was that every denomination, every church needs to form a committee to decide how they're going to block the Unification Church from reaching out to Christians, because look, this is what they are doing. They have this huge event, or blessing event, where they believe that, and they explained our theology, where they believe that their lineage has changed from the lineage of Satan to the lineage of God, and they're using direct witnessing now instead of indirect witnessing as in the past, and we need to be careful about these people. And this is the Channel 4, and then Al Jazeera and other media were given access to places around Chongpyeong. This is the International Middle and High School, and also the Chongpyeong Training Center as well. You recognize that. And also even to Al Jazeera came in and filmed one of our services in the Cheongbokgung, which you saw if you saw that program. And they also visited our various companies. This is the Yohwa factory. This is the Universal Arts Center, the Segiribo newspaper, and this is their interview, and our football team. This is the Christian television services report. Let's see what I can do about this. And Kook Jinim has appeared more recently on a number of talk shows on Korean television, 2 major talk shows. This was with the TV Chosun, where they asked him at a very interesting and frank discussion. Well, that's my briefing, and we really appreciate, more than anything, we appreciate Father for sending Kook Jinim and Hyung Jinim to us, and so that really our church could be reborn. So let's give a round of applause to True Parents and to Kook Jinim. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Elder. Don't you think that was really an inspiring report? Let's really applaud him once more. You know, when the Soviet Union began to collapse, one song became very popular called Winds of Change. And, you know, the whole world seemed to be in a whirlwind of change at that time. And I think that we are now at the point in our movement also where we are seeing real winds of change in the way things are being done. And I think you're hearing here this morning many issues that were really, challenged and brought up. And, it takes courage to do that. It's, as Christian was teaching, it's easy to be popular and to just toe the lines to some degree. To go against the current is not easy, and to especially deal with all the inertia that can sometimes exist there. So really I feel that what this is sharing with us this morning is the incredible courage, but he's not acting on his own just simply to in disagreement with what existed, but truly wants to serve true parents and to truly reveal who true parents are. So let's welcome our dear elder brother Kook. We are so proud.
Hello, can you hear me? It's good? How are you, brothers and sisters?
Well,
I'm glad to be able to have a chance to talk to you today. Oh, you had a lot to listen to today. So it's just 4 o'clock. What is it now? It's early. Korea, it's afternoon, 6:15. You must all be very tired. It's true. There are a lot of good things happening in our church, and our church is growing and improving in many ways. The Japanese church as well has seen, in the last 3 years, very significant growth in membership. We've had over net membership growth of 15,000 members in Japan over 3 years. And we've had very successful fundraising, witnessing. We've managed to actually reduce the church debt in Japan by over 50% in 3 years' time. The Japanese church had a lot of debt to deal with. So all the improvements in our church in terms of real numbers are there. We're seeing positive growth, improvement, membership growth, increase in spirituality everywhere in our church, and the significant churches all around the world. So those are very good things. But how many of you, I'm curious, have actually heard the Strong Korea presentation? Have you also heard the explanation about why these kind of things are happening now at this time? Because we know that true parents have announced that they've completed and succeeded in their mission of the Messiah. But at the same time, when they've announced that they've completed and that the kingdom of heaven is at hand and will be established, why is it that we're seeing the whole world all around us crumbling and we're at the verge of possibly another world war? That's a question which we need to examine. And true parents do give a very specific answer to that. And so although we like to hear the good things and the positive things and always want to be inspired, we also have to, in one respect, if we are going to be successful in dealing with the realities of the world and what transpires in the world, we have to be aware of what kind of course God's providence can take. Because Father said that very clearly a few years ago after he announced the declaration that Korea is the fatherland of God, that God's will and the kingdom of heaven would be established even if half the world's population disappeared. So this is the problem here. There are two paths in which providence can go at this point. We're at a crossroad in history. You see, the victory of true parents is at the level of true parents and their family. And the question is that whether or not the rest of the world can share in the victory of true parents and be a part of that victory and receive God's blessing together with them. And as we know from studying the principle and understanding the principle perspective, everything requires conditions. So for the people of the world to share in true parents' blessing and receive God's blessing, they need to successfully complete the condition to unite with true parents and to unite with the direction of the Messiah, so that they together with the Messiah can inherit the kingdom of heaven and receive God's blessing. The other course is, of course, if the world doesn't set the conditions required to receive the blessings, to unite with the Messiah, then what will happen is the kingdom of heaven will be established because true parents did fulfill their responsibility. But the rest of us, before we can enter the kingdom, will have to go through a period of judgment. And after the judgment, then the world would be reformed to create the kingdom of heaven. And so this is the puzzling and difficult situation in which we find ourselves today at this last days of human history. We see, on the one hand, a lot of inspiration and hope in the promise of the kingdom of heaven on earth. But on the other hand, there's a possibility that the rest of the world may not fulfill its responsibility, and that the world would have to be judged by God before they can inherit God's blessing. The principle says very clearly that the necessity of 3 world wars to restore the 3 blessings, conditional requirements of the 3 blessings. And as we taught and as we hope, we always hope that the 3rd World War would be just an ideological war, not a real war. But that's not what the principle says. The principle says that it could be a real war. We all thought that when the Soviet Union collapsed, that was the defeat and the end of communism, right? But actually, it was interesting that only a few years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Father said that communism is not yet dead. He said very clearly that communism will again be a problem centered on China. So the resolution of communism has not been resolved. And so this is what we're finding ourselves in here today, is still the atheistic communist dictatorship of China threatening the peace of the world. And that even though Satan's world will be destroyed and that God's sovereignty will be established, that before Satan collapses and is exorcised from this world, that he could create a devastating scenario for many people. That is the reality that we face today. And so we face that reality, but we also have been given by true parents very specifically, what the conditional requirement would be for the world to receive God's blessing. Right? True parents have explained to us that at this time, in the providence of restoration, in providential history, that it is absolutely necessary for both Korea, as the fatherland of God, and Japan, as the motherland of God, to become absolutely united and become one. It means they have to get married, these 2 nations. And centered on the marriage of Korea and Japan, the elder son nation of America needs to be preserved and kept in the Pacific region. And then with the elder son nation, all the other children nations of the world must be united to establish a successful 4-position foundation at the world level. And that this is the conditional requirement to extend true parents' blessing from the family level to the world level. And this is the conditional requirement which would enable then for the world to receive God's blessing. But the problem is time is running out. Foundation Day approaches and still the world has not succeeded in establishing the conditional requirement. And this is why we are really in a position where we have to really work hard to wake up the world. We are seeing some hopeful movements. Korea, the strong Korean message is being well received in Korea. We are seeing some movement towards establishing a preliminary defense alliance relationship between Japan and Korea. We need those things to go faster. But it's very clear that unless we have a world-level four-position foundation established, and that unless true parents' victory is extended to the world level, the world's people would not be in a position to receive God's blessing. And instead, they would receive God's judgment. This is the significant point. And so when we think about this situation, especially at this time when we see the threat of China, it's of course the military threat, the threat of real war, people killing each other, right? It really relates fundamentally back to the human condition which happened after the fall. We know what happened with the relationship of Cain and Abel, right? What happened with Cain and Abel? Cain killed Abel, right? And as we understand the principle, this human tragedy, historical tragedy, has repeated itself consistently throughout history. And that this struggle and conflict between Cain and Abel has occurred. So we must really try to understand the nature of this conflict between Cain and Abel. You know, when we study in the principle and we look at the situation between Cain and Abel, and the principle teaches us some of the motivations of why we think Cain killed Abel. What was wrong with that, you know? Abel was arrogant and made Cain feel bad, so Cain got mad and killed him. I mean, we have some of that explanation. But when we really think about it, we can also ask some other questions, as how was it possible that Cain killed Abel? By what means did Cain kill Abel? These are hypothetical questions which are very important to pose and ask, but yet are not well eloquated in our understanding of principle. But if you think about it rationally, there are very clear and insightful answers which come out from posing those questions. If you ask the question, how was it possible that Cain killed Abel? A very simple and easily understood answer comes out. Cain killed Abel simply because he could kill him. Right? If Cain couldn't kill Abel, how would Abel die? Abel died because Cain could kill him. What does that mean, that Cain could kill Abel? It means that Abel was weak. Abel died because he was weak. Abel was, I'm sure, a good guy, doing a lot of prayer and devotion practice, making offerings to God, taking care of his mom and dad, maybe helping his mom in the kitchen, so his parents loved him, God loved him. Maybe Cain was out hunting a lot, killing animals, being pretty selfish, so he was strong. And because he was stronger, and because he could kill Abel, he did. The history, the providence of restoration occurred because Abel was weak. Then we can ask a hypothetical question. The hypothetical question we could pose is, what if Abel took a part-time job? Seriously. If he took a part-time job as an inventor and invented a gun and built a gun, would Abel have died? You think it's funny, but it's a very serious question. this is a question which we pose. If Abel had a gun, would Abel have died? This is a question which all religious people should ask, because it really is the fundamental of the dynamic of the family of Adam and Eve and the story of Cain and Abel. Would Abel have died if he had a gun? Our postulation is this. If Abel had a gun and Cain came to kill him, Abel would take out his gun and say, "Hey, Cain, don't move or I'll shoot you." Then Cain, stupid, he's just selfish. This is what we're talking about, strong Abel theology. And if you look in principle, especially when you look to the world wars, or even in the example of Ronald Reagan, which we supported, which Father supported very strongly, what did Ronald Reagan do? He was strong Abel. When America was weak under Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan led the greatest military buildup in U.S. history. And the result of that military buildup wasn't war and nuclear annihilation of the world's people. It was the collapse of the Soviet Union. It was peace. Peace was the result of Abel having a gun. Europe here, you know the situation of the world wars very well. You know, after World War I, you guys went through that bloodshed and never wanted to see war again. Who would want to see another European war? But another European war came. But you know, who caused World War II? We all say, oh, that bad guy Hitler, he was the one who caused World War II. He did it. And it was Hitler who caused World War II. But the question I have to ask you English, and of course the French, is what were you doing during the decade when Hitler was building up his military? You knew that he was building up an army. What did you do? Were you able with a part-time job who built the gun? Or were you able just hoping for the best, being happy that God loves you and just pretending everything was okay? After Hitler took over the rest of Czechoslovakia, and he came and talked to him and met the dictator, and he came back to England and he said, "I've met Hitler. Hitler is a reasonable man. We have peace in our time." Well, that's the scenario of Abel that gets killed. And because you didn't build up your arms while Hitler was building up his armies, instead of seeing peace, you had to fight a real war. And you bled. Your countrymen bled. You lost the English Empire. And all of Europe bled. Because of wishful thinking. Because you didn't have the strength of arms to preserve peace. Because you didn't recognize your responsibility as able to be strong. Oh, in the end, we won. But it was not weakness that won World War II. It was strength of arms, military arms, weapons. If you study the history of industrial military production during World War II, you can see how exactly the pattern of the war and when the tide of the war changed. When the industrial productive capacity for making war weapons from the U.S. was added, that the tide of the war changed. And eventually the overwhelming production of the Allies' weapons production overwhelmed that of the Axis weapons production, and that's why they were defeated. It was strong Abel in the end that was able to save the day and to win victory. But if we were strong before the war started, then we wouldn't have had to see that bloodshed.
Yes.
You see, brothers and sisters, in this world, the ownership and sovereignty is extremely important. All things requires an owner, even weapons, coercive force. If those people who are good and the good people of the world say, weapons and coercive force, these are things I don't need. I don't want anything to do with them. I will not own them. It does not mean that those things disappear. It just means somebody else owns them. And if Abel rejects the ownership of weapons and coercive force, then Satan will own them. Cain will own them. And you will be powerless to defend yourself. And you will die. We have seen evil in this world, not because the nature of Cain and his selfishness, because we knew that he was selfish and evil to start with. We have seen evil in this world because Abel chose to be weak and not strong. That's why we see evil in this world today. And this is the problem which we face right now in the world. Abel has lost his way. The free democracies, the countries and peoples that God loves, have lost their way. They have become weak, rejected their responsibility to be strong and to preserve peace in this world. They have become selfish, only thinking about their own personal welfare and their own free health care and social security or free education. And they have not attended to the requirement and the responsibility of being strong in the face of evil to preserve goodness in this world. And this is why we today face the threat of the possible annihilation of half the human race. My brothers and sisters, really the question now is whether or not God's people, Abel's camp, will do its responsibility before God. It is in Abel's court whether or not the world receives God's blessing or God's judgment. True parents have done all that they can do. They have fulfilled their responsibility as the Lord of the Second Advent and the Messiah. And God's blessing will come to the descendants of this earth. But for the people of the earth today, this is their responsibility and your responsibility. The responsibility of our nations and of our leaders. The actions which they take will determine whether or not the world receives God's blessing or God's judgment. Our hope is that they can be responsible and lead the world to receive God's blessing. Thank you very much.
To hear giving really is a timely warning. As you know, he's speaking here in the UK, which did unfortunately fall asleep at the wheel before the Second World War. We're going to take now a group photograph together with Kook, so we'd like to invite him to come down.